William Stobart inherited Britain's most famous trucking company, but under corporate control, the empire his father built began to disappear. The story begins in Cumbria, 1970, with a single Bedford truck bought for £2,500 and a name painted in gold along the side: Eddie Stobart. Eddie, a former Royal Air Force mechanic, ran his new business from a modest depot, but even at that scale, standards were set high. The lorry was kept spotless, washed, polished, tyres blacked before every run. Drivers wore shirts and ties not just for show, but as a sign of respect for the job and the customers they served. From the start, Eddie's approach was different. Reliability came first, loads delivered on time, every time, no excuses, but it was the pride rituals that set the company apart. Each driver was treated as part of an extended family. Loyalty and hard work were recognised with a gold Stobart tie-pin, handed over in a small ceremony at the depot when a driver reached 5 years' service. The tie became a badge of honour, something to be earned, not given. Depot routines reinforced this culture. Before dawn, drivers gathered for tea and a briefing, swapping stories and checking their vehicles together. The lorries themselves stood out on Britain's roads, not just for their immaculate orange and black livery, but for how they were driven: steady, courteous, never cutting corners. The message from Eddie was clear: every load, every mile, every handshake mattered. William grew up in the middle of this world. His father, Robert, was Eddie's brother and right hand. William learned the ropes as a teenager, first sweeping floors, then riding out on long-haul runs, and eventually earning his own place behind the wheel. The lessons were simple but strict. Look after your truck, take care of your mates, and never bring the company name into disrepute. By the 1980s, the fleet had grown to 150 vehicles, but the founding ethos remained. Depot handbooks set out the rules in plain language: mutual respect, hard-earned pride, and the expectation that every driver wore the Stobart badge with dignity. Uniforms were supplied, and there was a sense that wearing the tie meant belonging to something bigger than just a job. This was a company where drivers ate together in the canteen, where management's door was always open, and where the culture was built on trust and shared standards. For many, it was not just a place to work, but a source of identity. The Stobart way was clear to anyone who passed a gleaming truck on the motorway. Here was a firm that took pride seriously and expected the same from every man and woman behind the wheel. William Stobart was born in 1961, the third generation to carry the family name into the cab and onto the road. From his earliest days, he was never far from the depot. As a teenager, he swept floors and learned to grease axles before sunrise, picking up the same discipline that shaped every driver who wore the Stobart tie. By 17, he was out on his first solo run, hauling over the Pennines in a Leyland, learning not just how to drive, but how to represent the family's reputation with every delivery. The 1980s brought rapid growth, but the 1990s saw the company transform from a regional name to a true national force. William moved from the yard to the office, taking on operations as the business scaled up. He introduced computerized scheduling, but kept the old traditions alive, insisting that every new driver understood the pride and standards set by his Uncle Eddie. The company's reputation for spotless lorries and reliable service began to attract major contracts. Supermarket giants like Tesco and chilled food suppliers such as Britvic signed on, trusting the Stobart badge to deliver on time, every time. The scale was hard to ignore. By the late 1990s, the fleet had grown to over 1,000 trucks, with depots stretching from Carlisle to the Midlands and beyond. The company's distinctive orange and black livery became a fixture on the M6 and A1, often spotted by fans who would note each truck's name in the Stobart Spotters Club. For drivers, the culture still meant something. Uniforms were issued, the gold tie pin was still handed out, and the canteen was always full at the end of a long shift. William, now a senior manager, was known for walking the yard, talking to drivers, and making sure the Stobart way was more than just a slogan. The company's workforce expanded into the thousands, but the sense of family remained strong. Each new depot carried the same standards: trucks lined up in perfect rows, drivers briefed with the same attention to detail, and the expectation that every customer would be treated with respect. William's rise through the ranks was not just a matter of inheritance, but of earning trust among the men and women who kept the wheels turning. By the turn of the millennium, Eddie Stobart was no longer just a haulage firm. It was a national institution, a symbol of British road transport at its disciplined, dependable best. But the sheer scale of the operation brought new pressures, bigger contracts, rising costs, and the need for investment far beyond what the family could raise alone. William found himself at the helm of a company at its peak, but standing on the edge of a new era, where outside forces and corporate finance would soon test everything that had built the Stobart name. By 2004, the family-owned era at Eddie Stobart reached its end. The sale of the business handed effective control to outside investors, bringing in a new board structure that placed financial oversight above tradition. William Stobart, who had spent his life inside the company, found himself reappointed as Chief Executive Officer, but now as a non-executive manager. The real power lay with the investor-appointed chairman and directors, whose priorities centred on returns and risk, not on the customs that had built the firm's reputation. The new ownership model was clear in its design. A dual-class voting structure gave the investor group, led by Henderson Global Investors, a 55% voting majority despite holding only 80% of the shares. This meant that even the chief executive officer could be overruled on any strategic decision, regardless of his experience or the family's legacy. Every major capital expenditure, anything over £5 million, now required unanimous board approval. Fleet upgrades and depot expansions, once decided by the family, became subject to lengthy committee reviews and, frequently, outright vetoes. The pace of change slowed. Projects that once took months now dragged on for nearly a year, as William's proposals for new trucks or depot improvements were delayed or rejected by directors focused on balance sheets. The board's composition reflected the shift in priorities. The chairman, Sir Andrew Hart, came from the world of private equity. The new chief financial officer, Margaret Haynes, answered to the investors, not to the drivers or the depots. Independent directors sat alongside, but their remit was governance, not culture. William, for all his years in the business, now reported to the board rather than leading it. His authority was circumscribed by formal structures and voting rules that left little room for the old ways. The consequences soon became apparent. Executive pay was capped, with bonuses strictly limited to a narrow band tied to profit targets. Senior managers who had risen through the ranks saw their incentives shrink, and many left for other firms. The decision-making process, once rooted in the needs of drivers and customers, now revolved around investor presentations and quarterly results. The original Stobart culture, pride, discipline and loyalty, no longer had the same protection from the top. The company's fate and William's own ability to influence its direction was now in the hands of a board, whose interest lay far from the yard and the open road. Depot managers across the country began to notice changes almost immediately. New rules came down from the board, some subtle, others impossible to ignore. The most contentious was the end of free uniforms. For years, every driver received the signature orange and black kit as a mark of belonging. Now drivers were told to pay £45 a month for the privilege of wearing the company colours. For many, it felt like being asked to buy your own badge of honour. One veteran driver with 20 years behind the wheel described it plainly. "We used to earn the tie, now we're just paying for it." The depot canteens, once hubs of camaraderie, grew quieter. Managers found themselves enforcing policies they never would have written. Overtime was squeezed, bonuses trimmed, and the old rituals like the 5-year gold tie pin were quietly dropped in favour of quarterly targets. The new priorities came from above: net margin, efficiency, and return on investment. The board's focus shifted from the depot yard to the balance sheet. Brand managers hired from outside haulage began talking about monetising the Stobart name. Licensing deals followed. The Stobart brand, once reserved for trucks driven by company men and women, started appearing on third-party vehicles across Europe. By 2012, licensing accounted for nearly 20% of revenue. The logo became a commodity sold to anyone willing to pay for the badge. In internal meetings, William Stobart argued that the brand meant nothing without the drivers and the standards behind it. But the numbers on the page won the day. A depot manager in the Midlands summed up the mood. "We were told to think like a logistics business, not a family firm." The name still meant something to the public, but inside, people felt it slipping away. Driver satisfaction scores fell. Long service staff left, replaced by agency and contract drivers with little connection to the old ways. The pride that once came from spotless trucks and shared standards gave way to the churn of a business chasing growth at any cost. The Stobart name still drew attention on the road, but inside the depots, a sense of purpose was being lost. William, caught between the boardroom and the yard, watched as the company's identity was repackaged and sold, unable to turn back the tide. For the men and women who had built their working lives around the Stobart badge, the company was becoming something they barely recognised. William Stobart did not walk away when the old ways gave way to boardroom rules. Instead, he tried to build something new on his own terms. In early 2016, after years of watching decisions drift further from the driver, first values he grew up with, William put forward a plan for a separate haulage venture. This new company, WS Transportation, would not be a return to the past, but an attempt to revive the best of it: discipline, pride, and proper respect for the people behind the wheel. Driver-first values were at the heart of the idea. William committed £12 million of his own money to the project, joined by a group of Midlands hauliers who pooled another £25 million. The business plan was clear: keep the operation focused and manageable, aiming for a fleet of 95 trucks in the first phase. The company would target short-haul, high-frequency work, routes that relied on reliable, experienced drivers rather than anonymous agency staff. Every driver would have a stake in the business, with a 20% share of profits set aside for the workforce. This was not just a gesture, but an explicit attempt to restore the sense of ownership and pride that had once defined the Stobart badge. Annual tie ceremonies returned. Driver councils were set up, giving staff a direct voice in how the business was run. The company handbook spelled out the promise: no one would be left out of pocket for wearing the uniform, and every employee would know exactly how their efforts contributed to the bottom line. The hope was that these small but significant steps would bring back a sense of belonging that had been lost in the corporate shuffle. But even with these changes, WS faced limits that could not be ignored. The company lacked the scale to win the largest contracts, and the market had shifted. Fuel prices, insurance, and regulatory costs squeezed margins to just 3%. The big logistics firms could offer cheaper rates and wider coverage. WS could not use the iconic orange and black livery. Those rights stayed with the parent company, leaving the new trucks with a less familiar look on the road. For customers, the connection to the old Stobart name was there in the paperwork, but not on the motorways. Still, for a brief period, there was a feeling among the drivers that something real had been rebuilt. William was seen in the yard, talking to staff, listening to their concerns, and trying to run a business that put people first. Investors were promised a fair share, but not at the expense of the culture. The 95 truck target was ambitious, but grounded in reality. A reminder that growth for its own sake had cost the old company dearly. The effort to revive the original spirit was genuine, but the world outside had changed. WS Transportation had to operate within the same financial pressures and market realities that had forced the Stobart family to sell in the first place. The hope was real, but so were the constraints. On 12 October 2014, a covenant notice arrived at Eddie Stobart's boardroom. The company's EBITDA had fallen below lender requirements, triggering a breach that left directors with 30 days to avoid administration. The response was immediate and severe: asset sales, a 15% cut in depot overheads, and the closure of Manchester, Sheffield and Newcastle depots. 300 jobs disappeared overnight. Those who remained faced longer routes and heavier schedules, with daily mileage up by more than a third. Fatigue incidents multiplied. and the camaraderie that once defined the depots gave way to unease and exhaustion. Chief Financial Officer Margaret Haynes laid out the numbers. Revenue was slipping, margins narrowing, and the cost of upgrading to Euro 6 emission standards was overwhelming. Each compliant truck cost £35,000 more than the last. For a fleet in the hundreds, the math was punishing. Investor representatives now dominated the board, and survival trumped any return to the old driver-first culture. William Stobart, still present but sidelined, watched as cost-cutting swept through the company. By late 2020, the strain was unsustainable. Legacy debt mounted and operational gaps widened. Eddie Stobart Holdings entered formal talks with Kalina Group, a heavyweight in UK logistics. On 3 January 2021, Kalina completed the acquisition, taking on £150 million in debt and absorbing the entire business, including the brand licensing portfolio. The integration was swift. Over 140 low-efficiency trucks were retired, the rest folded into Kalina's fleet, and the Eddie Stobart livery began to vanish from British roads, except where licensed for third-party use. Drivers were offered a £5,000 retention bonus to stay through the transition, but most saw the end coming. For the first time since 1970, the Stobart family had no operational say in the company that bore their name. In November 2024, Eddie Stobart died at 95. His passing marked the end of an era, not just for the company but for British haulage. The collapse echoed across the industry as family firms like Wincanton and J&R Carriers faced the same pressures: regulatory costs, rising capital demands, and relentless consolidation. The Euro 6 mandate alone forced dozens off the road. Veteran drivers spoke of pride replaced by paperwork and a badge that once meant belonging now reduced to a logo. Analysts pointed to numbers, but for those who remembered the old rituals, the loss ran deeper. The Stobart name survived only as a brand within a multinational, and the age of the family haulage empire faded into legacy and history. Today, British haulage is dominated by corporate logistics giants, and the discipline, pride and family identity that once defined firms like Stobart have all but vanished. For thousands of drivers, that loss is more than nostalgia, it is a warning. When financial targets trump culture, even the strongest names can be stripped of meaning. The real question now is, who will shape the next generation, and what will they stand for?